90-degree eccentric isometrics are a training method that have been popularized by Joel Seedman, who's a PhD in kinesiology, and he claims that not only are they as good as or better than steroids, yeah, he actually said that. I'm not making that up. But he also claims that they're the best way to train for hypertrophy, strength, power, and joint health outcomes. The question is that actually true? My name is Ryan Benoonheis. I'm a doctor of physical therapy, and today I'm going to be breaking down the science behind some of these claims. 90-degree eccentric isometrics are basically just a way to train movements in which you do a slow eccentric down to 90-degree joint angles, do an isometric pause at that bottom position, and then typically do a fast or explosive concentric. In many of his posts, Joel claims that these are the best way to train for strength, hypertrophy, power, and joint health, so we're going to break down each of these claims one by one. First up is 90-degree eccentric isometrics and strength. Strength is basically defined as the ability to produce force in specific contexts. To address Joel's claims that 90-degree EIs are the best way to train for strength, I have two studies for you. The first is a 2016 study by Rhea et al. This study took 28 subjects and split them up into 3 groups based upon squat depth they would train in the study. Those groups were a quarter squat group, a half squat group, and a full depth squat group. The subjects then trained to their specific squat depths for 16 weeks, after which their strength performance in all 3 conditions or all 3 squat depths was tested. Basically what they found is that each subject improved the most in the squat depth that they trained. So the people in the quarter squat group improved their quarter squat performance the most compared to their half and full depth squat performance. The subjects in the full depth squat group improved their full depth squat performance the most, and so on and so forth. What this study ultimately shows is that you're probably going to improve performance in whatever you specifically train the best. So if you train for full depth squatting, you're probably going to improve that more than someone who trains just a quarter or half squat depth. On the other hand, a 2019 study by Kubo and colleagues had slightly different results. They took 17 subjects and had them perform either full or half squat training. After the training or intervention period, they took all the subjects and tested their squat strength in both conditions, and they actually found that the group who trained for the full squats actually improved their full and half squat performance better than the half squat training group. So it's not completely black and white when it comes to strength improvements. There's a lot of evidence showing that strength training is specific to the task in which it's trained and in which it's tested, but there is definitely carryover to other similar tasks. However, I would be fairly confident in saying that training 2 specifically 90-degree joint angles would probably improve your performance in that more so than training to full depth, but I definitely would not be comfortable saying the other way around. So it kind of depends upon what your goals are, and you should ultimately tailor your training to those specific goals. If you want to get stronger at full depth squatting, you should probably train to full depth and not just partial range of motion training. Next up, we have hypertrophy, which luckily is a bit more straightforward. The first study they have for you is a 2021 study by Mayo et al. That looked at muscle length and hypertrophy outcomes in hamstring training. I really like this study because they took 20 subjects and had all 20 subjects train one leg with seated hamstring curls and the other leg with prone hamstring curls. Therefore, the seated hamstring curl leg went through a larger overall muscle length, and the leg that did prone hamstring curls went through a much shorter muscle length. Ultimately, what they found is that there was greater overall hypertrophy in the leg that did the seated leg curls compared to the prone leg curls, which shows that training through relatively longer muscle lengths is likely better for hypertrophy. Next, we have a 2020 systematic review by Schoenfeld and colleagues that looked at 6 different studies that were all deemed to have excellent methodological quality and that looked directly at muscle length and hypertrophy outcomes. What this systematic review determined is that, on average, it's better to train through longer muscle lengths and therefore likely larger ranges of motion for hypertrophy outcomes compared to shorter muscle lengths, which is less range of motion. It's also important to note that this is a systematic review that looks at multiple studies, which means that it's a better overall representation of the whole body of evidence on this topic compared to just one study in isolation. However, it is also important to state that this doesn't definitively prove that longer muscle length training or larger range of motion training is superior for hypertrophy in all muscle groups in all situations. But it does show that the general rule of thumb is that longer muscle length training and therefore larger range of motion is likely better on average for hypertrophy. And this goes directly against the claims that Joel makes when looking at eccentric isometrics and their supposed benefit for hypertrophy compared to training through longer ranges of motion. Next, we're going to look at power. In layman's terms, the physical quality of power is basically our ability to produce force very rapidly, or what we call explosively. This is often best exemplified in things like sprinting and jumping. The 2016 Rhea et al. Study from earlier also looked at the effect of squat depth training on sprint performance and jump performance, and they did find that the quarter squat group improved both of those more so than the other two deeper squat groups. So that is some evidence that using partial range of motion training might be beneficial for power output. But it's important to note that other studies in this field don't specifically show that as well. For instance, this 2012 study by Hartman and colleagues took 59 subjects and split them into three groups: a deep front squat group, a deep back squat group, and a quarter back squat group. This study found that the deep front and deep back squat groups had better improvements in their counter movement jump performance than the quarter back squat group. So while there is conflicting data or conflicting evidence on what is best for power output, whether it's partial range of motion or full range of motion, it's often recommended to train with both styles because they both do improve power output, and they each might have unique benefits that the other doesn't have. One important thing to note is that how the reps were performed in these studies is quite a bit different than the way that Joel Seedman implements 90-degree eccentric isometrics. The squat reps in these studies were done with pretty normal tempos without a intentionally slow eccentric or an isometric pause in the bottom position, which is important because using the slow eccentrics and the pauses in the bottom is going to minimize how much of an impact the stretch shortening cycle can have, which is a big component of power output. So if you want to train for power, it probably makes sense to do both partial range of motion squatting and full depth squatting, but you want to train your reps in a way that are fast and explosive and powerful. You probably don't want to make them intentionally slow or have long pauses in the bottom of the movement. And lastly is the claim about joint health. Joint health is basically the overall condition and function of a joint, but it's important to know that this is in the context of your lifestyle and the activities that you typically do. Things like pain, range of motion, and load tolerance are a part of what determine joint health. But if you have somebody who just does powerlifting and then you all of a sudden have them try to do an Olympic weightlifting program, that is a very different set of demands than what they're normally used to. And even though their joints might be well adapted to powerlifting training, they're probably going to feel like shit the first couple times they do Olympic weightlifting style training. That doesn't mean that their joint health is bad. It just means that it's a very different demand than what they normally have on their bodies. It could be argued that full range of motion training is better than 90-degree eccentric isometrics or partial range of motion training for joint health if it allows you to either improve or maintain the range of motion and load tolerance that you need for your typical training and daily activities. But this is not a hard and fast rule. On the other hand, it could be said that 90-degree eccentric isometrics could be beneficial for joint health if they allow you to reduce pain and train more effectively by managing your load better. Training to 90 degrees, doing eccentric isometrics, or combining the two and doing 90-degree eccentric isometrics can absolutely be beneficial for lifters, and they can have a place in somebody's program. If a particular part of a range of motion for a certain lift is painful or really aggravating for somebody, or if you're just trying to limit loading a little bit, then using those strategies can be very beneficial and can be the right thing to do. Plus, as we saw earlier, training through partial ranges of motion may have better overall carryover to some feats of athletic performance. And slowing down movements can be beneficial when trying to learn new movement patterns in general. However, they're certainly not the holy grail of training, and they're not going to be the secret that turns you into an elite level powerlifter or help you give Ronnie Coleman a run for his money when he was in his prime. They're certainly not comparable to the benefits that you get from using steroids, and saying that they're the best way to train for all of these physical outcomes, whether it's hypertrophy, strength, power, joint health, general athleticism, whatever, is just plain silly and wrong. Training at regular speeds and through full range of motion is probably better for strength in those positions and in those contexts, probably better for hypertrophy, and there is evidence that it also improves athletic performance as well. If you want to learn more about pain, injuries, and rehab, then make sure to subscribe to my channel.